The Battle of Sirte refers to the battle in the spring of 2016, in the region of Sirte, Libya, between the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant and the forces of the Government of National Accord backed by United States of America.ISIL forces had captured Sirte 1 year earlier, during the previous battle. The offensive on Sirte launched on 12 May 2016, under the name Al-Bunyan al-Marsus, variously translated as impenetrable wall or solid foundation. Fighting took place east of Asdada, around 80 kilometers south of Misrata. On 16 May, GNA military forces recaptured Abu Ghraib from ISIL militants. The next day, the GNA took control of the Al-Wishka district, 25 kilometers from Abu Ghraib, and eventually reached nearly 50 kilometers from Sirte. On 19 May, an ISIL suicide bomber attacked GNA forces, 90 kilometers west of Sirte, killing 30 soldiers and wounding 50. In late May, pro-GNA military forces seized many locations near the city of Sirte from ISIL, including the Sirte power station, and advanced on the town of Yarif to the south of Sirte. Also in late May, the eastern front of Sirte saw action. The Petroleum Facilities Guard captured the towns of Vinjawad and Nufliyu from ISIL. On 4 June, GNA forces captured the Gardabia Air Base, 10 to 20 kilometers south of Sirte center. However, ISIL recaptured the airbase the following day. On 8 June, GNA fighters entered Sirte for the first time after capturing a bridge on the city's western outskirts. The next day, fighting was concentrated near the Ouagadougou Conference Hall, where ISIL held religious instruction sessions, and GNA forces managed to surround the hall. Meanwhile, some ISIL fighters started retreating from Sirte, while PFG forces advanced within 70 kilometers to the east of Sirte and reached the town of Harawa. On 10 June, the GNA captured 2 barracks, a bridge and an intersection in Sirte. In addition, the Libyan Navy secured Sirte's coast and blocked potential escape routes for ISIL via the sea. The following day, street fighting continued to rage in Sirte and heavy clashes took place around the Ouagadougou complex, with GNA forces hitting with artillery fire ISIL positions around the conference center. On 12 June, GNA forces secured both Sirte Sport Airport and a residential area in the east of the city, while fighting was continuing 2 kilometers from the conference hall. ISIL fighters in the city retreated into a densely built-up area, with snipers taking up positions against the advancing GNA forces. ISIL also started using waves of suicide bombers to stall approaching GNA forces. 3 ISIL suicide car bombers targeted a field hospital in the west of Sirte, as well as 2 positions of GNA fighters, including at the Abu Hadi roundabout in the southeast of the city. On 13 June, the GNA advance in Sirte slowed as they reached the residential areas near the city center. ISIL fighters were held up in the central and northern part of Sirte, and a GNA counter-attack against ISIL positions at the town's main western entrance, after the suicide bombings the previous day, was repelled. On 16 June, a suicide attack at a police station in Abu Ghraib, at a crossroad between Sirte and Misrata, killed 10 soldiers and wounded 7. Also, expand GNA scouting team in Sirte was wiped out and the bodies paraded by ISIL. On 21 June, GNA forces secured areas in the 700 neighborhood south of the city center, and gained ground to the west of the center of Sirte in the heavily damaged District No. 2. Other gains included the Ben Hamel Mosque, the electricity headquarters and the radio station. During the advance, the GNA positioned themselves within a kilometer from the conference center. Meanwhile, GNA fighters withdrew from the port, although they still controlled the port road, due to heavy ISIL sniper fire from a nearby hotel. Some 400 to 500 ISIL fighters were operating in the port area. During the advances, GNA fighters suffered heavy casualties, with 39 being killed and another 140 wounded. Another report put the number of GNA dead at more than 40. On the 28th of June, the British SBS engaged in a 30-minute gun battle near Sirte with ISIL forces, killing 203 ISIL militants, including 3 British fighters. On the 1st of July, ISIL fighters were driven out of the 100 and 700 neighborhoods, and GNA forces had surrounded the conference hall. ISIL fighters were also still holed up at a nearby hospital, with snipers and landmines slowing the GNA's progress. The next day, the GNA captured the city center, or at least part of it, as well as the harbor. By the 7th of July, Merghani Badawi al-Bashir, nicknamed Abu al-Harith, was killed by a drone strike. A leading local ISIL commander and a prominent Sudanese preacher, Merghani's death was regarded as a heavy blow to ISIL by experts. On the 9th of July, a mass grave was discovered by GNA forces on a farm on the southern edge of Sirte. The next day, an ISIL ammunition store was hit in the city center by ground fire, while more airstrikes hit other ISIL positions. In turn, ISIL fired Grad missiles at GNA positions in the 1st, 2nd and 3rd residential districts and the university campus. On the 15th of July, heavy clashes erupted around the conference center, leaving 21 GNA soldiers dead and 139 wounded. During the fighting, 3 ISIL suicide car bombers, including a Libyan and an Egyptian, hit GNA forces in an unsuccessful counterattack. GNA fighters managed to enter the conference complex, but had not been able to capture it. Some 10 days later, the GNA captured the largest ISIL bomb factory in Sirte, a hotel in the eastern part of the city, part of the Dollar neighborhood, and the security headquarters. On the 1st of August, at the request of the GNA, the United States Air Force began to bomb Sirte, targeting ISIL tanks and vehicles in support of the GNA forces. The attacks put further pressure on the estimated 1,000 ISIL fighters who remained in the city center. The strikes hit 2 T-72 tanks, a fighting position, and 2 construction vehicles. One of the tanks had been a menacing problem in the Dollar neighborhood, managing to repeatedly beat back advances by GNA forces. It had also been reportedly used against civilians. After its destruction, the GNA managed to advance into the area. The next day, an ISIL rocket launcher and a heavy equipment excavator were also hit. In course of these airstrikes, another Sudanese ISIL commander, Qusay al-Jaili, was reportedly killed, though other sources said he had died of illness or wounds. Al-Jaili had achieved prominence by masterminding the escape of 4 assassins of U.S. diplomat John Granville from the Koba prison, Khartoum, in 2009. By the 4th of August, Dollar was secured. On the 7th of August, GNA troops showed a small former ISIL training camp with an assault course, along with foxholes, that was taken by GNA forces. On the 8th of August, the GNA seized an area of guest houses close to the Ouagadougou Conference Center. 2 days later, GNA forces took control of the Ouagadougou Center, Sirte Sibin Sina Hospital and the university campus. During the fighting, a GNA fighter jet was shot down over Sirte with both pilots missing. By the 11th of August, 70% of Sirte was under GNA control. At this point, the GNA started launching incursions into neighborhoods 1 and 3, two of the districts that were still as hell. The following day, bombardment commenced of neighborhoods 1 and 2. Meanwhile, it was confirmed that GNA also took control of the Amina Hotel, the police academy building and the Al-Ghisa military zone. On the 13th of August, the city's radio station and the Indian buildings were captured by the GNA as they advanced into Neighborhood 2. During the fighting, there was an attempted ISIL suicide bomb attack against the advancing forces. 3 days later, pro-GNA militias captured the Neighborhood 2 district and started advancing into Neighborhood 1. During the fighting for Neighborhood 2, ISIL fighters launched 9 suicide bombings that killed 9 GNA fighters and wounded 82. Following the capture of this area, only neighborhoods 1 and 3 remained as hell. On the 18th of August, ISIL fighters from outside the city attacked GNA fighters at a rallying area and a checkpoint, killing at least 10 GNA fighters and wounding 20. Another attack by 3 suicide bombers was prevented and the attackers killed. Between 21 and the 22nd of August, pro-GNA militias captured the Rebat Mosque, the city's biggest and main mosque, as well as the internal security building that was used as an IS prison, a courthouse, the Al-Naga district and Dubai Street. During their advances, the GNA discovered a major hoard of gold, money and weapons inside the IS security headquarters. In one room, there were boxes of gold, jewelry, wads of Tunisian currency, rifles and shotguns, computers, radios and cartons of telephone cards. On the 25th of August, GNA's spokesman for the operation Mohammed Al-Ghasri stated that ISIL had withdrawn from most of the Neighborhood 3 into a small part of the neighborhood as well as the northern half of Neighborhood 1. On the 28th of August, the GNA suffered heavy casualties in fighting while advancing into Neighborhood 1 and 3. 5 car bombs were deployed by the militants in the battle, though at least one was destroyed before it could reach its target. Hospitals in Sirte reported that 34 GNA fighters died and 150 more were wounded. U.S. and Libyan warplanes bombarded ISIL-held neighborhoods in Sirte overnight. The Cordoba Mosque, which ISIL had renamed to Abu Musab Zarqawi Mosque, was captured on the same day along with other areas of Neighborhood 3. GNA militias announced the next day that they had completely captured Neighborhood 1 with ISIL still controlling half of Neighborhood 3. 10 GNA fighters were killed during the clashes while 12 were wounded.